as we try to understand how the cross saves us, one of the useful ways of going into that mystery is by looking at the Jewish feasts. We understand that Jesus came to bring fulfillment to the Jewish law and really bring those feasts to their completion through his life and ministry. One of the most central feasts in the Jewish liturgical calendar is the Day of Atonement. During this festival, the Jewish people would really be atoning for their sins. And a key part of that festival was where the high priest would take a goat and he would lay his hands upon the head of the goat and speak the sins of the people onto the animal. In this way of transferring their sin to the animal, they believed that when the animal then died, they would be free from all their sin. This is where we get the term in our modern world of the scapegoat, someone who takes the blame for other people. Now, an interesting part of this in the history was that it's said that they would tie a scarlet thread to the horn of the goat. And once they had gone through that ritual, they would then tie another scarlet thread to the door of the temple. The historian Josephus, the Jewish historian, says that every year there was a miracle that would occur where at the point when the goat died, the scarlet thread tied to the door of the temple would miraculously turn white. And everyone would be standing expectantly waiting for this miracle to occur every year as a real promise that their sins had been forgiven. Now, the interesting thing is that in his history of the Jewish people, he says that about 40 years before the destruction of Jerusalem, that miracle stopped occurring. For us as Christians, this is the fascinating part of the story because the Jewish temple was destroyed around 70 AD. And so 40 years before that is just around the time when Jesus was crucified. And so it speaks to us of the fact that Jesus has now completed that ritual, so it never has to be completed again. This is an image that St. Paul picks up on in the letter to the Corinthians. He talks about how the sinless one became sin so that we could become the righteousness of God. He's using this image of the scapegoat, that Jesus, who was born free from all sin, has taken upon himself the sin of the whole of humanity. And then he has died upon the cross so that we can now become the righteousness of God. This speaks deeply to us about our freedom, the promise of our salvation. But I think it also draws us into the mystery of the experience of Jesus upon the cross. Very often I hear Catholics confused because when we pray in the Creed that Jesus descended into hell, and they always say, well, how could that be? You know, that Jesus, who was free from sin, how could he go to hell? This line by St. Paul starts to open up the mystery for us, that the sinless one became sin so that we could become the righteousness of God. If you imagine that Jesus takes upon himself in the Garden of Gethsemane all the sin of the whole of humanity, every sin that has been committed from the dawn of time, but also until the end of time, he takes all of that upon himself. Now, it's hard for us to comprehend what that would look like or feel like. But what we do know is that sin cuts us off from God. Our understanding is that hell is a place of self-exclusion from God, as it says in the Catechism. It's that place where our sin has created a natural blockage between us and God. The two things can't mix, between sin and holiness. It's like trying to mix oil and water. No matter how much you try, they can't come together. Now, this opens for us a profound mystery, that Jesus experiences within himself all the sin of humanity. And in doing so, even though he is God, he starts to experience as well this complete separation from God. It's so hard for us to comprehend this, and yet the papal preacher, Father Raniero Cantalamessa, talks about this and says that The real suffering of Jesus was not the physical suffering that he experienced in being crucified, but actually it was the fact that his very soul was almost being torn in two because he had taken upon himself all the sin, which was at the same time separating him from his very experience of divinity. It starts to make sense for us why upon the cross he cries out, my God, why have you abandoned me?" Because in that experience of our sin, having taken our sin upon himself, he actually experiences what people in hell would experience, of being completely isolated and abandoned and cut off. And yet there in that place, he breaks the power of sin for all of eternity. Now, once again, this is where we have the opportunity to unite ourselves with him. If we can bring our sin and really claim that grace of mercy, claim the fact that he has died for us to break the power of all sin, there we can experience within ourselves the freedom and the liberty that has come to us through his death upon the cross.